right. Thank you, Sarah. And indeed, also from my behalf, happy to see so many faces, familiar and less familiar faces. I'm Danny. I am the founder of Twipe and CEO as well, for the past 14 years on a journey to innovate in a space which is called digital news media. And in that context, always curious to learn more and happy to share learnings. As Tara was saying, it's part of our mission to try to understand the world around us, to try to see how technologies are actually shaping the future of news. In that context, happy that we have indeed Lucky with us today. He actually interrupted a kind of a hearing session, I understood, at the British Parliament, and we will come back on that a bit later, to be with us. And so Lucky, welcome here. Just contextually, I have been visiting, let's say, together with one IFRA study tour in San Francisco, where we were kind of meeting with publishers, we were meeting with AI companies. And quite honestly, Lucky, I must say your story triggered me the most in all the different kind of AI startups. And that's why we're so happy to have you here to talk a little bit about Miso, but also talk a little bit about a broader journey that you have at heart in terms of AI and data and ethics and the efforts that you're doing yourself and with your company. But before that, you have a quite interesting background, haven't you? Like starting in medicine and then getting into kind of publishing technology. Tell us a little bit more about
that. Yeah, so I've worn a lot of hats over my life. I think that's kind of what happens when you grow up working class and you want to kind of get out and have a different life for yourself. So I think I've had a job since I was 13. And one of those first jobs was working at a newspaper. I used to work at the Sun Sentinel in Florida. They had a very cute local insert of high school students that would write 1 page per week of, opinion editorial. So I did that. I worked at a research firm where I did like IP research. And then I just happened to be very fortunate. I got a scholarship to go to Cornell, studied, I did my own self-study in neurobiology and behavior. That kind of, I'm also South Asian. So that when you're growing up, they kind of tell you doctor, lawyer, engineer, be whatever you want to be, but pick one of these three, we'll be very happy. So, I think especially for my mom's sake, I started to think about medicine, but it was really from a global health background. To be honest, I sort of really got, this is around like 2000 to 2004. There's just a lot of awareness starting back then about global health, the HIV epidemic in sub-Saharan Africa, and that you could actually make a difference. Honestly, that this was a crisis that you could actually solve. And so how I got from medicine into tech and then news media is that it was really two things. One is in my 20s, I got very invested in HIV activism. So I actually co-founded a group with friends called medic.org. We built software for community health workers and pitched it to a couple of foundations, and they actually said it was a good idea. Right. And it just kind of took off. It's still running. It serves millions of patients around the world. And sort of at like 25, I basically found myself in the middle of places like Malawi and Rwanda and Uganda, working on projects and building infrastructure. I think that the tech experience of that was really, very embryonic and early. But I think the actual experience of being there and working with really committed people on the ground, that is where I think I got a lot of what drives me today is really like first principles thinking. Because if you think about the early 2000s, the HIV epidemic looked pretty hopeless, to be honest. I mean, and we're constantly going through the news in terms of just the levels of the spread of the virus, what it would mean for the continent. And I think that what I got to see firsthand was a group of people who said, no, we can actually stop this and slow this down. And so I got to work with groups like Partners in Health and the Clinton Health Alliance. And, what I basically saw firsthand was a first principles approach that said, okay, how is this virus spreading? How do we slow down the rate of AIDS progression? How do we stop mother to child transmission? And it got down to simple first principles, which was about how do we get drugs at low prices? How do we make sure patients take their drugs? Okay, if we start with that, you start to realize you need community health workers that actually are embedded in the community, working with patients. Okay, how do you pay these community health workers? How do you make sure that, even simple things, Danny, like realizing that you can't have people take medication if they don't have food. So we start bundling food and direct care. And then when people recover, you hire them as community health workers. It was kind of this entire system of like,
so a lot on the ground. But how
yes,
do you connect that to being an active
yeah,
leader in a
in
tech
news.
company? Because
Yeah.
you started as
Well,
a
that's kind of
journalist, kind of
right.
thingy,
I
being
think
very young.
I think at the time I was really in my 20s kind of bouncing between things I was very passionate about, and it did not make sense until I got to like late 30s, if I'm being honest. So, I was doing the work in global health. I met a professor at Stanford. He had funding from NIH, DARPA, and a few other organizations, and he basically pitched the idea of, why don't you take your tech skills and your background in virology and you build a news engine to read the news around the world and monitor for the next outbreak. That was basically how I fell into it. So for
Okay.
about 2 years, and I had been coming out of this global health experience where we're on the front lines working against a virus that
Okay.
you could have
So, but
probably with
can we fairly say that you build a scraper, a bot,
yes.
to try to
That's putting
capture?
it mildly, Danny. Yeah, we
Yeah.
built a really large RSS crawler that basically pulled in data in 32 languages around the world from hundreds of news sources. And then we built early stage machine classifiers to look for emerging signals that these were chatter about outbreaks. And that even got into subtle things like you can't, for instance, classify an article about beaver fever as a hemorrhagic virus, right? Or fever, right? And so you had to build these early stage things. This is 2010 to 2012, but it worked. It worked really, really well for its
Okay.
time. And it kind of gave me the awareness that machines that could read the news were eminently available. And then the question mark was more like, what do you do with that?
That's a very, very early stage. Eh? What time did
Yeah.
Miso come on your radar, on your horizon?
So Miso basically the work started about 10 years ago. So I went back to Cornell Tech. I joined a lab with my co-founder, Andy. We were part of a group called the Small Data Lab that was headed up by Deborah Estrin, who is our professor, and Deborah has a long history in computer science. And our group was basically charged with figuring out what is state-of-the-art models that can be run with real-world data. So like the real data of an actual website, not Netflix, not Amazon, not Google, but the scale of, say, the New York Times or an even or a smaller publication or a platform
Okay.
like Meetup. And so we basically did research around how to use what now we call foundation models and embeddings to do personalization in real time, to do immersive search.
And
And
that is
it
very much
worked.
in a lab environment, research, and then
Yes.
what is the link then with, let's say, real business? Because with all due respect for lab and
Yeah.
science,
Well, this
where
kind of
did you
tells
make
you
the
about me
connection?
as a yeah, this kind of tells you a lot about me. There was no
Yeah.
business goal to the lab. We were just doing research for the fun of it. And then
Yeah.
two things kind of happened simultaneously. We had built this research assistant for fun
Mm-hmm.
where we could ask it questions and it would pull up research papers, and we started showing it to people and they pointed out that this was a good idea. And
Okay.
so I think we showed it to Tim
Could you
O'Reilly and the team at
could
O'Reilly
mm,
Media, and we had done a project for Bloomberg Philanthropies, and we started getting the advice of leaving school to start a company. We didn't know what we were really doing, Danny. I mean, if I could,
uh-huh,
I mean,
yeah.
of all the advice you give to a
Tell
graduate
a little
student,
bit more, Tim O'Reilly, for those who do not know. He
yeah.
is
So
quite
Tim is,
an iconic
yeah,
figure, and many of us in early days have been reading books of the
yeah,
O'Reilly publishing
yeah.
house.
We did
Tell
too,
us a
of
bit.
course. Yeah. So we had like built this research paper engine where you could ask a question and it would find snippets from the papers. We had shown it to a friend of ours who was at O'Reilly Media, and he pointed out that there's his name is Roger. He's a friend of Tim's, and he was like, "Look, this is actually pretty promising." And so he showed it to Tim, and Tim, as usual, kind of spotted something way before everyone else and he asked us to come over to his house. He baked us scones and then very calmly explained that we should really pursue this. And it was a really big deal. And so they became our first media customer.
And
Basically, we
so,
built answers for them to begin with.
could we say, was it, if you have to kind of give it a word, was it a search engine on top of the books? I think O'Reilly is a book publisher,
Yeah.
like with a lot of manuals and guides for computer programmers and others.
Yes.
Was it a
That was
search
really
engine, or was it
it.
already a kind of an answer machine? If I can make the difference, the
No,
perplexities versus the Googles.
it was somewhere in between, to be honest. It
Okay.
was somewhere between search and AI answers today. So the model we were using at the time was BERT, we had figured out vectorization in its early embryonic stage. And so you could ask a question and get the answer as an excerpt from the book, as a
Okay.
quotation from the book, but it couldn't write an in-depth summary. BERT back then was only good for retrieval and
Okay.
never really advanced past that stage. And so we had built up this entire system to basically open up the books. I mean, the big realization was that there was all this information that was trapped inside the container of the book. And that, normally you would keyword search and scroll around to find what you're looking for. And we didn't need to do any of that. You could just ask the question, get it immediately, and do it really, really quickly. And so that was really how we
And
started. And that kind of is
and
what propelled us forward.
and what is the impact there on if you look a bit O'Reilly Publishing? I think you've been now
Yeah,
partnering with them for I
for
don't
many
know
years now. Yeah.
many years.
Since
Can you give
2020.
a 2020? So that is before
Yeah.
ChatGPT was launched.
Yeah.
If you use BERT, for people who are a bit less familiar, BERT, to my knowledge, the foundations behind the transformer models developed in the Google
Yes.
labs.
It
And
was
so
one of
a
the first
really
open source.
early stage open source app.
Yes.
But you're working together with already for, let's say, the past 5 years now. What
Yes.
kind of impact have you seen? What kind of usage do you see? What kind of use
Yeah.
cases are relevant to share with our audience here today?
I mean, I think like two things have really happened. One is you see a much higher rate of usage when you take the friction out of you move away from high friction search to very frictionless answers, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
usage levels go up. But I think also the orientation of engagement changes because people suddenly realize there's all this information that they didn't know was accessible. And so
Yep.
I think the appreciation of the archive changes and it kind of changes the value proposition suddenly from saying, hey, I have all these books, on the
Sure.
wall to, hey, what do you need right now? Right. Because we can actually get it for you. We can make it directly accessible. So that was really a big shift. I
And
think the thing that,
was the aim of O'Reilly to kind of still sell more books or to turn the business model upside down? What is the kind of the underlying strategy
uh,
of a book publisher using this kind of answer engine early
yeah,
versions? What was the kind of the business case
I think it's
behind?
actually pretty simple. I mean, O'Reilly is a online platform for book publishers, not just their own books, but multiple book publishers. Like any
Mm-hmm.
subscription platform, you need a high rate of engagement at the end of the day. And so for them, it's really been very simple. They get more reader engagement, they get more direct utilization of subscription. People find more value to it. You're able to sell more B2B subscriptions. You're able to sell more individual subscriptions, and you get higher
Okay.
retention. I mean, that thesis is pretty straightforward. I think the thing I give them credit for that, I think gets really overlooked easily here is that they're very creator first. They have one of the, first and earliest author royalty systems
Okay.
for this type of subscription model. And you could see that like before, a different group would have said, look, this is good for us because we're going to divert all of the traffic away from opening the book and reading it. And we'll just deliver the answer ourselves and we'll keep the upside. They did not, to their credit, do that. They actually really worked very closely with the author community. They reworked the royalty system as we rolled out answers. And authors have
That's an
benefited from
interesting
that.
move. And could you see that
Yeah.
as a kind of a precursor of, and we will come back on that a bit later, the big answer machines taking over the perplexity, the chat GPTs,
Yes.
where O'Reilly has found a model to kind of still provide incentives for people to write? Is that kind of how does that work in
Yeah.
practice?
I think what they've really been committed to figuring out is how do you maintain a frictionless experience for users and still maintain the incentives and the economics for the creators, right?
Sure.
And what O'Reilly
But how
kind
does
of
it
is
work
an
in practice?
experimental
I am a
platform for that.
creator. I've been writing a book. I'm a
Yeah.
deep knowledge expert.
So
And then
your
you
chip,
have Sarah joining online, going to the answer
yeah,
engine, typing in 3 questions, and maybe
yeah,
let's say
I
two
could go through that.
pages. 2 pages are
Yeah.
accessed from. Do
So
I, as a creator, receive a kind of a contribution margin or something on that
yeah, I
access?
can break it down. So you say you're Chip and you wrote the book AI Engineering, which is one of the most popular
Yeah,
titles right now. So, you've published the book, you make
yeah,
money from the print sales, of course. You also have digital reads and you get paid for those. So whenever anybody opens the ebook version of the book on O'Reilly, there's
yeah.
a
There's
royalty that
also
gets paid for that as well. But when answers run, even if you're not the entirety of the answer. We calculate the attribution percentage
Okay, so
of
you have a
Chip's book in the answer, and then we calculate the value of the answer, and we pay out a royalty against that. And because
okay.
the answers volumes are high relative to
Okay.
search, that's kind of the way that this gets monetized over time.
Now, how do you connect that now to the world of news publishers? Because book publishing is, of course, it's one game. News is, let's say, shorter articles, daily production, variety of creators. How do you now connect in that world? What sort of business cases, value propositions have you been able to do now recently with Miso?
I think the realization that has dawned on us is that what we've done with O'Reilly is we built a liquid search system. The question now is that as AI and content collide, you have this type of landscape forming around liquid media. You're not going to have homepages. You'll probably have AI news feeds.
Just
clarify
a bit. Liquid media for many people in the room, probably a new concept. What is it? What is it all about?
So instead of having sort of solid static media like articles or sort of like constrained interfaces like search or newsletters that are one to many, you get to a place where the information is more remixed and repackaged directly in line with your interests, the things you've asked about or explored in the past, right? Things that are trending but relevant to you. And it's just sort of brought to you and mediated to you by an AI platform, right? And most likely one that's either aggregated, like the Perplexities or ChatGPTs of the world, or local, which is the systems we build with publishers. And so I think what we realized with O'Reilly is that you can build these systems for, a reasonable amount of time and labor. It's good for them because they get higher engagement, and they change the actual value proposition of the platform from being just about having premium content to having premium content married to a professionalized or premium AI experience on their subscription package. And that's basically what we've been building towards with news publishers and B2B publishers around the world.
So Bloomberg is also a reference. I heard you're working with Bloomberg as well on that.
No, Bloomberg's an investor. We did some early work. With
interesting. Okay.
So we have they were one of our earliest investors. James Cham is the partner for that. But
maybe very, very briefly, we have a question here. Thank you, Doris. Very briefly, do you also see more engagement, like connections between readers and authors, conversations happening in your platform, or is that a feature, is it a development that you see happening?
Sorry, Dan, can you say that one more time? I lost this.
No, do you see, so you already kind of have this answer engine, and then do you see kind of more engagement like between readers and authors, conversations happening, or is that a feature that kind of is on your roadmap to kind of enable more engagement?
I think that like the reader, the author conversational part is really interesting, specifically in like examples like O'Reilly and other expert publishing systems, right? So the ability to have, I think there's a few aspects of this, the ability for authors themselves to see the questions people ask and discover what questions they don't have coverage for is really useful to understand where the audience interest is and where you need to fill these dead zones of coverage. So I think there's a responsiveness to that. But I think quite literally, Danny, we're very close to building a system where you could like actually talk to an expert, that we could condense down based on all of the works of an AI expert,
and not the author anymore.
Well, yeah, it's not the author anymore, but one that quotes the author directly, that builds on their work, that builds on everything from podcast interviews to their books to video interviews.
So like the digital twin of that. Okay, very interesting.
What does it look like to talk to an archive?
Thanks, Doris, for the question. If you have any other question, please don't hesitate to kind of post it in the chat box. But maybe let's look at something else. You just came back from a session at the British Parliament, where I think you've been doing some research with your company at bots and at scraping, Project Sentinel. Could you maybe, if you look at give us a bit of a highlight, what is that project all about? Because I think you're a little bit on a crusade there in the industry.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that the fundamental problem facing the publishing industry is that AI companies are taking a product that costs money to create in terms of news and media, and they're taking it for free and they're monetizing it, and they're not asking for permission. And the royalty frameworks are very opaque right now and limited. So the fundamental question in all of that we wanted to focus on with Sentinel is, can we document and investigate how they're getting the data in the first place? right?
Okay.
And so what we've done is we are now monitoring about 7,000 publishers and news sites around the world. Every day we check their articles and we check their robots file. The robot articles are pretty straightforward. This is just so we understand what are they writing about and what's their expertise and coverage. The robots file is very much to understand who do they not want to visit to the site, right? Not want to have access, whether it's for training or for RAG or both. And so then we basically prompt systems using those insights to say, okay, Perplexity.
So you try Perplexity, Google, whatever overviews, and you see are they indeed respecting the kind of protection mechanisms that are in place? And what did you find out recently?
Well, we found out that it really doesn't matter. Well, I guess there's a few levels to this that we found out. One is that we found out that there's over 1,600 bots that are on the radar of publishers globally. So
how many?
This is a 1,600.
1,600 bots that are
1600, right?
Wow.
So that is, normally when people think about bots, they think about the most well-known bots. They think about maybe Common Crawl, they think about GPT bot or Google's Google Extended,
TikTok and so on,
Perplexity and so on, right? Yep. But this is actually like a really large number of under the radar bots that are, pummeling websites with traffic. So from conversations we've had with publishers, we've realized that 20 to 50% sometimes of traffic, it's just bots.
Sure.
And you're paying for that.
You have a bit of traffic. But do they respect some of the kind of the guardrails that are out there, the robots TXT file? And do you have some evidence? Can you have a clear case? Discovery?
So what we basically have done is we've taken the index of articles that we have from publishers that we're monitoring, and we've basically sliced it down to the 1,000 publishers that have told Perplexity don't use our data. And what we've discovered is the ability for that set of publishers to still get their articles in Perplexity and to get images is still extremely high. That it really does not matter if you say in a robot. So
Perplexity is one of the players, of course. They just announced the kind of a funding round at the valuation of $14 billion.
Yes.
And this is huge, enormous. And if you say it doesn't matter, can I translate that? They don't really care about
15% of the time. Back in February, 15% of the time, you would be able to get an article. Today, based on the latest test that we ran with a fairly straightforward prompt, we got 90% of the time you could get the article. So it's 1.5 to 9.0 in less than 90 days.
I do remember we visited Perplexity in our study tour in January. And we addressed that openly, and the response was quite striking, because they were really saying, we do respect it, but yet we also source it from third-party scrapers.
Yes,
and
that's the real story.
They don't respect it, right?
Right.
But that's actually easy. It's an easy answer, isn't it?
Right. Well, I think that's really the crux of this. You may say in your robots file, Perplexity bot disallowed. They also have new bots that they've quietly released as well. But if you don't know who their friends are, their friends will go to your site and they'll collect your data and they'll sell it. This is not some free exchange of scraper bots. There's a commercial industry of paid services that allow you to go retrieve publisher content, and they're just basically transacting as a gray market behind the scenes. So this is the main thing that we've been trying to get awareness of.
Because we have still one question and a very short answer here. What is the solution actually? And is it not of all times that, let's say, publishers are copying from other publishers and news is being made and news is being, so is that, what is the kind of
no, I think that's, publishers, when they cite other publishers, they give credit and attribution, and that's a well understood model. But this is very different. I just want to be clear. If a publisher told another publisher, don't use my content, and that publisher used their content in their journalism, that's a problem. And I think that's really the fundamental thing here. We're talking about news groups who told Perplexity directly, please don't use our content, and you still find their content, right? 90% of the time. And so
is it legal action now? What is needed? Is it legal action? Is it joint publisher action? Is it
I think there's three things. There's three things that we can work on. One is that there's about 42% of publishers in our index right now don't have up-to-date robots files, period. So,
So that's the first thing.
first, let's just update our robots files. Second, turn on bot blocking. And that is unfortunate because that's a cost to publishers, but balanced against the cost of having fake bot scraping, visit your site, drive your server costs up, and there's making money on the back of it, reasonable to think about. And then the third thing I think is some level of litigation and regulation lobbying to let regulators know that, this is a system-wide exploit.
That's why you were in the
also,
parliament today, no? In the British parliament. Huh?
well, I think right now here in the UK, well, I mean, this was a meeting at the House of Lords that was a consultation on what's happening within the tech. What are the different tech perspectives on this question about how to protect copyright, how to fairly compensate creators, and where the law should go? I mean, the UK is having a pretty open debate in Parliament about AI on the one hand and copyright holders on the other. And I think that, like, for that, my perspective on this is, like, to get to fair compensation for publishers, we can't have open theft. You can't have it be easy, cheap, and profitable to steal from people when they say, I don't want to work with you. And I think that we're not going to get to any type of licensing market that's really reasonable
soon
with that in the background.
We have to wrap it up almost here. Maybe very, 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 very short.
Yeah, sure.
If you just look ahead 5 years from now, what is the future for news publishing according to you? Where is it that where will we be, and what has to be done tomorrow?
I think it's going to be very personal and very direct. So it's very likely you're just going to wake up in the morning and you have your own personal AI that delivers to you a news feed, a morning briefing, alerts, handles search. I think that's where most of the big tech companies are really racing right now. There's a problem maybe in having 5 companies decide that future. So we'll see what happens. But I think that the user experience of that is pretty clearly moving in that direction. And I think news becomes a conduit in that type of model.
All right. Okay. Thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing all your feedback and your background and your learnings from that medical ground experience to today and your activism on copyrights. With having said that, we haven't been able to answer all your questions, but we're happily connecting you with Lucky separately if you wish to, such that you can engage further with him. He's a fascinating guy, as you can see.
There's not that many Luckies on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find.
And I'm going to quickly hand it over to Sarah to wrap up the session.